What is going on, everyone? Man, it's good to see you all again. I'm Justin,
And I'm Myron.
and this is another episode of the Just My Luck podcast. So we are uh, very excited to get into this topic, and it, there's a lot of places we could go with this, and honestly, I think this is just the tip of the iceberg, right, Myron? With this particular topic, so many branches on this tree. We're going to be talking about relationships and marriage, or relationships and marriage. We might get into marriage, might focus on the relationships. We'll see where the conversation goes.
Mm-hmm.
But the main thing we want to get into is breaking down relationships. And I'm feeling today, my vibe is really wanting to talk about the relationships. Just start off with the relationships in general,
Mm-hmm.
like with just the people around you, with yourself, just kind of general. And then over time, we could probably get into the marriage, whether that's this episode or next episode, or just anything. So, man, so to start this off, how did this even come up? Well, a couple of episodes ago, Myron and I were talking after the show, and we were talking about, man, as men, we have relationships, obviously with our wives, we have relationships with our kids, but we don't talk a lot about relationships with other men that we
Mm-hmm.
have, just friends and even really close friends. We don't really talk about it that much. And then me and Myron got into a little talk about it, and I was like, hold on, save it for the pod. We'll actually talk about it on the podcast. So
Mm-hmm.
I want to really open up the discussion here, Myron, with and maybe one day we can get some of our other close male friends on here.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to open up the discussion talking about that. So I think as men, obviously there's our background, there's our how we're brought up, there is our experiences, our wiring, how we're wired.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a really big proponent of that and discussing that. It's also learned things that we learn along the way, how to interact with uh, other men. Um, and we also have to take into account society. I think societal, cultural norms play a factor. Um, there's so much that goes into relationships just with just friends, other male friends is what I'm talking about specifically here.
Mm-hmm.
So me personally, I grew up in a single uh, parent household. My mom and dad were married until I was about 11 or 12. And again, the only reason I know that is because I found the divorce papers like last year or 2 years ago and saw the exact date. And I was like, oh, I told my wife, I was like, I was 11 or 12 or something. I forget how old I was, but I was around 11, I would say. And so I grew up until that point with my father in the home. But before they divorced, even he had moved out and they were separated. Now, my dad was in my life. Never wanted to claim that he was not. He was definitely in my life. But as far as who I lived with, it was my mom. So I was raised by a woman, and because of that, I was instilled with a lot of characteristics that people would associate with a female, right? I'm very agreeable, very friendly, or just naturally, I would say, very agreeable, very friendly, compassionate, and again, this is what is traditionally associated with females. I'm not saying this is right or wrong. I'm just saying what society uh, says. I'm not saying I agree with this. I'm just telling you how I am. And so very, very kind. Um, and what ended up happening was as I got into my coming of age years, thinking like 18, 19, going to college, I really had to find how to navigate the world as a man because mind you, I'm 6'1". I'm a big guy. I mean, I'm muscular, 6 foot. I'm a big guy, but the characteristics that I have aren't what society may deem that I might have just from looking at me. So I really had to learn how to navigate the world. Because growing up, I was always, did well in school, did what I was supposed to. I didn't really get a lot of other outside viewpoints outside of my family. until I got to college. That's when I got more objective, like, hey, not even in high school, in college, it was like, okay, this guy's really different from me. This guy's really different from me just because people from different backgrounds, right? So that's when I started to discover, I was like, okay, so when it comes to meeting guys and just as friends, obviously, I'm a heterosexual male, so I'm not talking like dating. I'm just talking about in general, meeting guys that I wanted to connect with and be friends with. It didn't come easy to me. Um, Women I can more easily connect with because I grew up literally I was raised by a woman. And a lot of my mom's sisters and stuff, there wasn't a lot of times where I was just riding around with my uncle or uncles or with my grandfather or anything like that. What's up? It's a Boopy.
What's up, Vanny?
He said, hey.
Did
He said, hey, baby.
I say what's up?
Yeah, you can have a few. I don't mind. Take it downstairs. So
If I get, so if I take it downstairs, I get some.
no, you can just get some anyway. You don't have to do anything to get those. You just get them because I want you to get some. So, but anyway, when I got to college, man, I didn't really grow up with stable in always around men in my life. I had men in my life, but not always around my dad. Even I didn't live with my dad. I saw my dad, didn't live with him. So there was a lot to unpack when it came to, building relationships with guys. I really had to learn how to do it. Um, Also very naturally sensitive as well, like very much of an empath, very sensitive. I really, really had to, again, one side I was born with, I grew up with that side. The other side I had to take, I had to learn as I went. And what started happening was I met guys that have now become close friends and just started to see what some of those traits, some other traits from what I had were. And I started to take some of those in. I started to be more, this is learned. This wasn't natural, it wasn't my environment. This was learned. I started to be more assertive. I started to use my logic a little more, right? About things. I've always been inquisitive, but I started to be able to get more discernment, so to speak, before making an action. Um, and then it took me even longer to learn some of the other things that are required for a man out in the world. So because of that, I started to be able to develop some of those other characteristics that I had to learn. What what people culture would typically define as more masculine.
Mhm.
And I learned those. I had to learn those. So grew up feminine, learned or raised by a woman, had to learn a lot of the masculine, and that allowed me to go out in life and exist in this world and navigate it much better, much better. And there are other factors as well, which I don't have time to mention. Obviously, Myron has his insights as well. But when I started to learn the characteristics that I needed, or not needed, but I didn't have, take the ones I wanted, work on them, combine them with what I already had in me, it turned me into a man with the ability to build relationships with men a little better. I always had like a joke, kind of a jokey relationship with guys, right? And I still do. I mean, that's still part of me. I make jokes all the time when it comes to with guys. Um, have a lot more serious conversations with women than I do with guys. But that's because my father was very jokey around me. We always cracking jokes, stuff like that. So I obviously exude those characteristics. And so I really have developed the ability to really go in deep with other men over the years. And because of that, I've been able to not only meet guys that I can really talk to, but really talk to them about real issues that we go through. And that is what makes relationships strong. That's intimacy. People think it's just sex. It's not. Intimacy is being vulnerable with each other, telling someone, hey, I'm feeling this way. I'm struggling. I've been on calls with Myron before where, hey, man, I've actually started crying before when Myron was cutting my hair a couple years ago because and he said, "What's wrong?" I said, "The weight of it all." I couldn't even give him a real concrete thing, right? And I realizing now that was just stress that had built up over time. But that's just an example. I couldn't have done that years ago. But because I've been able to kind of gather that melting pot of characteristics and developed into who I am now, I've been able to better build deeper those relationships with other guys. So it's definitely been a journey for me. And if you're out there and, if you're like me, for example, I'll let Myron tell his side, but if you're like me, you say, man, I grew up, uh, maybe you're a guy that's agreeable. Maybe you're a guy that's naturally kind, not as naturally assertive, naturally passive. And I'm talking about myself. If you are naturally like that because of your upbringing or whatever have you, there's nothing wrong with you. I tell you that now. That's just how you're brought up. You can't change that. You can't affect that. What you can do is to navigate this world. You are going to need to be passive in certain situations. You are going to need to be kind. You are going to need to be agreeable. Those are important characteristics. But you're also going to need to assert yourself. You're also going to need to use logic. You're also going to need to be aggressive sometimes. You're also going to need to use other parts that you may not naturally have, but you have to go out and get. And that's what I want. That's what I want to give to you practically. I want you to sit down, and I don't care how old you are. Better if you're younger, honestly. I mean, the older you get, obviously, you can still do it. But if you're younger, this will be even more benefit to you. You have a set of characteristics, that's great. I'm not saying it's good or bad. It has its place. It's okay to write those down, but what you really want to write down is what kind of man do you want to be? Right? How do you want to show up in the world? How do you want to show up in your relationships? And not just with men, but in general. Do you want to develop your assertiveness? I'm definitely able to say no, establish stronger boundaries now as a 34-year-old man than I was back then at 18 when I first entered college. Do you need to be more assertive? Do you need to be more organized? Do you need to be more disciplined? All of these things you may not have naturally, or you may, but you may have to learn the other side. Maybe you need to learn to be more agreeable. Maybe you need to learn to be more passive. People have, man, in the United States, culture leans toward people that are more aggressive, more extroverted, so to speak. Culture leads toward that as far as the society that we live in here in the West. Like that's around. I can honestly tell you that people, and they frown upon being passive, right? But people have died just jumping into something. People have died just acting. That has its place, like in a crisis, but everything's not a crisis. And I'm telling you, people who were here a few years ago are no longer here because they made a jump decision because they are aggressive and they act quickly. They do so without thinking, or they say something without thinking, and they're gone. They're gone. Whether they're actually dead or they may be in jail, they may have done something crazy. People are like, why did they do that? They didn't stop to think or even be passive. They could have just been like, okay, look, if I do this, this is going to happen. I'm just going to let it go by, let it pass, right? So these characteristics are write them down. They're not good or bad. Just write them down. What you want, what you have, and what you want to be, what you want to learn, and then go out and get it, man. Go out and learn it. I don't care if you need a book. Work on one at a time. It doesn't matter. Get what you need to show up in the world and to build those stronger relationships. Not with just guys. I know I've been talking about relationships with guys and my foundation in that, but it'll help you in all your relationships and as you navigate, especially in the West, in the United States. I can't speak to other countries. I've read about the culture in other countries and what they favor, but I've never lived there, so I can't speak from experience. So that's my take on it. That's my take on just my upbringing, how it affected how I showed up when interacting with men and building those relationships with guys, and then the results now, what I did, and then the results now. So what about you, Myron? Talk to us.
Well, I grew up a little bit different than Justin because I didn't have both of my parents in the house. I had my mom And but kind of luckily I had my grandparents just too, so I grew up with my grandparents and my mom. And we got a pretty big family on my mom's side. So a lot of the people that I grew up with were, a family, but Justin grew up in a larger city in comparison to where I grew up at, if you want to consider Byram a city.
Right. It's city now.
Yeah.
And mind you, Byron's not that big, you all for the listeners. It's not, but it's bigger than where Myron grew up.
Mm-hmm. Like my hometown, you literally could get on a road from my grandparents' house and drive straight through town and don't have to make any turns, and you pretty much visit the entirety of the city for the most part. But yeah, I mean, I grew up and I think probably there are some similarities in terms of like me and Justin's upbringing in terms of like growing up with our mothers and stuff like that. But I would say naturally, because of my relationship with my grandparents and particularly my grandfather, I had an example of kind of a
Yeah, that's
male
good.
figure, but I've also
That's
kind of
good.
taken some of his characteristics in terms of some of the things that some of his approaches, I would say.
That's good. Good stuff. Yeah.
I think that in terms of relationships growing up, uh, the town that I grew up in was predominantly a white town at the time. Predominantly a white town in terms of the people. And the majority of the people that I grew up with as a kid when I was going to school were white, particularly like the males,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of black females. But more so, when you're a kid, especially when we grew up, the thing girls got cooties and
The Deep
all that,
South.
you know what I'm saying? And all that other type of stuff. So, you build relationship with guys because y'all playing games together, you playing sports together, stuff like that, basketball. And by me being African American, I in some cases I tend to be a little bit more athletic, than some of my peers at that age, elementary school age and stuff like that. Um, and I grew up I was in like the gold class, right? In terms of like when, with the elementary school, quote unquote levels.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't that I kind of realized in terms of like how different my behavior was compared to my other African American brother peers until I kind of met a lot more of them around the time I say around like maybe second or third grade, I would say. And I kind of realized that they were a little bit different from me, you know.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them were a little bit rougher around the edges. They may have grew up with a father, or they may have not grown up with a father and just had more interaction with, some of our other peers that were, African American. So a lot of those things in terms of those relationships with me, it was kind of weird because I was told at one point, hey boy, you kind of act white, you know what I'm saying? So they like, hey, you act white.
Yeah, same.
But like being at that age, I was like, well, what does that mean? You know what I'm saying? Like I thought I was just being myself, in terms of the environment that I grew up in. So that was a initial shock in terms of what did that look like in terms of interacting with other people. So I think I had initially a bad thought process of having to kind of like fit in. Plus, I'm not 6'1". You know what I'm saying? I'm, you know, I might look like I'm Justin's height, but I'm right. You know, I'm standing up during our podcast. He's sitting down, and you know, so
He's stronger than me though, y'all. He be lifting,
you
he be
know,
squatting 400. So
no.
with a vest.
But in terms of just like, you know, relationships, I think I had a poor start, you know, because I felt like I wasn't necessarily, it took me some time to learn how to actually be who I was, and kind of be okay with that. You know, and as I developed and kind of grew into who I was later on in life, I began to be more comfortable with just being myself. And I think I had some of those similar characteristics that Justin kind of mentioned, you know, in terms of being passive, not being as aggressive, and you know, uh, you know, where I come from, you know, it's a, you know, ain't really much to do in terms of activities and things like
Right.
that. You know, it's either you're an athlete or you in the band. I was in the band or whatever, and I was an athlete in terms of like playing sports and stuff, or people having sex with one another. It
Facts.
ain't, I mean, just keeping
That's true.
the buck is it's not a small town. Everybody know everybody. You know, ain't a whole lot going on outside of school. You know, once you're done with school, unless you're a part of some after school program, which there wasn't many of those, if any, you know, depending on the time frame when I grew up and stuff like that. So just wasn't a whole lot to do. So people were getting into things that were not as productive, quote unquote, you know. But I really didn't feel like I really became or was comfortable. I think I always was still a good judge of person, even though I was not always as how do I want to say this? Although I was accepting or looking for acceptance. That's the word. That's the phrase I'm looking for. Although I was looking for acceptance, I began to kind of see like, oh yeah, I think that person kind of, me and that person kind of vibe. One of my friends in particular, I mentioned his name, Michael Bradford. Um, he was in my wedding and everything like that. We were extremely close, but a
Cool
lot of
guy.
it became because of similar interest. You know what I'm saying? And you know, same situation. Like we athletes and stuff like that, but you know, outside of that, you know, we like video games. So that was a thing, particularly for me, that kind of kept me out of the work, you know, out of the worldly things or whatever. And then also it kind of, for me, it was kind of an escape too, you know, a mental escape from maybe some of the experiences that I had or was going through or whatever. But I felt like he understood who I was. So I think in terms of friends, like one of the few true friends I feel like I initially had that I can really think about, I'd probably say it was for sure him, you know. I had other good friends and stuff like that, but I still feel like I was, with those people, I felt like I was not being myself, you know. And I had to learn those things, you know, in terms of that, and uh, even a lot of the aggressive, you know, like you were saying, like the self-starter or some of those other characteristics. I think that those are things that, man, I still really was trying to develop even when I was in college. You know? Even after meeting guys like you and, you know, some of our other friends that we know, like it still, you know, it still wasn't necessarily who I was. But the crazy thing about now versus back when we were kind of growing up or going through our developmental phases in terms of things, I think that I think young men now are getting more of a leg up because of the experiences that you and I had. So we're able to provide them more insight in terms of developing relationships, either with themselves, um, with women, and that's a
100%.
whole nother topic in terms of what people may feel about the relationships between men and women now. But I think men are now more aware in terms of their experiences, and I think people are kind of like, unfortunately, with relationships, and I know we kind of like shifting to different areas, but I feel like people are more. I think that intrapersonal perspective for folks is an INTRA. I think the intrapersonal relationships that people are having with themselves are stronger now. People are more, they're not as accepting of people's or society's BS. People are,
That's true.
More apt to start their own businesses and, create other type of avenues for themselves, than I think than they were when we grew up, because our parents grew up trying to establish, hey, they had loyalty, grandparents staying with a factory for 20 and 30 years and, being, getting pensions and stuff like that. Folks ain't doing stuff like that now,
Right.
People staying in one job and stuff like that for that length of time, now. But I think the area that our generation, I think that we're more interpersonal. I think we are able to connect with people better. But I think there's some people that, especially with this COVID and, and forcing people to kind of isolate themselves and kind of be themselves, I think that is developed in terms of relationships. I think people either struggle or kind of get what they want to get out of relationships and kind of, but I don't know if people are as good at maintaining relationships and stuff like that as I feel like as the generations evolve.
So what is something, so if there was a younger guy, 18, 19-year-old, or let's say your son or your daughter, right? In your case, Myron, they're looking at this, what's something that they can take away, from your experiences? What is something they can practically go and do right now that they can take away from that?
Terms just right, developing relationships.
Yeah, developing, and that can be intrapersonal, like with themselves. That's great. You mentioned that, or with others. Like you mentioned, there's a struggle possibly maintaining relationships. So how can someone better maintain their relationships? What's a good tip that you can give people that they can like get off and go do today if they wanted to?
The first thing that comes to my mind in terms of my thoughts automatically goes to, honestly developing more of awareness of who you are.
That's good. That's good. What are some ways people can do that? Because that's really good. Just sitting and thinking, writing it down. What are some different ways that you would say?
It's kind of crazy because even at 36, I think I'm still developing some of those thoughts and things, but I can say it as a part of my journey. I would say part of my thoughts has been part of my thoughts have been being able to kind of try things or kind of listen to some of those inner passions or thoughts that you kind of like have that you kind of gravitate towards.
Yeah.
Like, for example, like I've always thought about being in the military, you know, have deep passions, could tell you like ranks and stuff like that. Did ROTC and everything like that, but for whatever reason, it just never has clicked in terms of either different things that have happened or, but it's always been like there, you know, in terms of like interest, you know. So I think like if you have those things, I think that one, try those things out and I think spend more time developing your ability to navigate this world without anybody else's assistance, I think too.
There you go. That's that. You just hit the nail on the head. We can turn this off. Let this man cook.
And I think that's part of the reason.
There you go. That's
why, like, when I even think about my marriage, you know, I think that there's been struggles of that because of either codependency or, you know, me and my wife in particularly, like, we kind of hung each other on each other's bootstraps and was, I don't know how you metaphorically could like drag each other at the same time, you know. But you know, I think as a, you know, if I look back at it now, I think that I really wish in some cases that I developed more of a relationship with myself and being able to either establish things, you know, for myself so that when I incorporate a woman and kids and responsibilities and stuff like that into it, that I'd already have some of those things, some of those skills, some of those, you know, mindsets and stuff like that. I already had those things kind of together. I remember Minister Louis Farrakhan mentioning in like a teaching session that he had with the members of the Nation of Islam. He was kind of saying like, you know, he just feels like a man as a leader, you know, and I know it's different for societal norms. And like we've said before, you know, different strokes for different folks in terms of things. But in terms of that thought process, it's like, you know, he kind of broke down men in terms of like a woman being a nurturer, a creator, being able to take a meal, right? Ingredients. If you give a woman ingredients, she can make a meal, right? You give a woman you have an idea and she can create something. You have sex with a woman, she can create kids. You know what I'm saying? It's like, it's the woman's essential, like, foundational, like, personality and those characteristics lead her to be a creator. But if she doesn't have anything to create with, she becomes bored, you know, frustrated. When she doesn't have somebody who's providing direction, you know, or leadership, then, you know, it becomes an expansion of kind of, and which I feel like, you know, people should be able to still expand and find out what it is that they like, but, you know, any company that's building, this finding out, this developing company has a mission, has values, you know, mission, vision, and values, you know, anytime you pulled up the website of a company, I work for the University of Central Arkansas. They have mission, vision, and values. Any organization that I've been a part of, all of our fraternal organizations that we're part of have mottos, right? Or for Phi Beta Sigma, which is the fraternity I'm a part of, you have the 12-inch rule, right? You know, everything is something to where you have some type of vision or a set of things that make you, make that organization run, and has everybody unified in terms of like, this is the direction that we're going. So yeah, I think just long story short, man, develop an intimate relationship with you before you incorporate developing any type of intimate relationship with anybody. Know who you are, so that way you can articulate who you are. And then that way you can also be able to decipher whether you want to engage in a relationship with this person or that person or that person, because the interests or the values kind of merge together. And if they don't, then you don't have to engage in a relationship with that person, at all. But that's to the choice of the individual. But develop a relationship with yourself. Intimate.
That's good, man. That's gold. That's golden. That's golden. Man, so that's just the tip of the iceberg, you all. Hopefully you all found value in that. I know I did. I think that Myron hit the nail on the head about developing a relationship with yourself. When I think back, just to kind of close this out, when I think back on my life, I can say my biggest growth moments were when I was alone and was able to, there's anything that a lot of stuff that I did alone, talk to my creator, prayer, writing things down, reflecting on what I already wrote down. It was all alone. And that's that development, where some of those things, some of those realizations, some of those insights, some of those epiphanies were things that propelled me forward. Life-changing sometimes, like little pivotal moments. Like, hey, man, I remember just one example, just to close this out, man. These are the kind of pivotal moments you can have. I remember in 2014, my wife was, she got a promotion here, or not here, but in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And we at the time lived in Memphis. And I remember I had the option. I was working in a recording studio as the social media manager, and I had the option to stay back. And because I was really enjoying what I was doing, I wasn't even really getting paid like that. I wasn't employed. So, I was, but I wasn't getting paid that much, essentially. And but I was passionate about what I was doing at the time, right? And I had that option to stay back or go with my wife to Chattanooga. And I remember it being such a struggle in my mind to figure that out. I even made a post back then when I was on social media a lot. I made a post and said, man, I'm struggling to make this decision. I didn't tell people what it was, but I was like, I was struggling. And I was literally in turmoil in my mind. Like, what should I do? I was tired. It was crazy. And I figured it out, man, by sitting alone, praying, writing down on paper the pros and the cons. What could happen if I stayed? There were some benefits, but there were a lot more cons to it. What would happen if I go? There were a lot of benefits. There were some cons, right? And there was a lot more to it. But when I finally walked away from that session, when I just sat with myself and came to the decision, it was a life changer, because I then moved my wife to Chattanooga, Tennessee, or went with her. And the rest is history. We became very established in Chattanooga. We're able to, start a home, start a family. Get a house, start a family. We're able to make moves, meet people that took our careers to the next level. There's all kinds of different things that all happened because of that one little decision. Had I stayed back in Memphis, I might have been a much better engineer, right? Recording engineer, social media manager, working in my passion, but no telling what that could have did to our marriage, that distance. So we'll never know because that one little decision changed everything. And that was a moment when I was alone. So um, that's just one example of getting to know yourself and what you think the best decision is, the best way that you can navigate through the world as yourself. That was gold, Myron. That was probably we could have cut the podcast off and been great, Gucci on that. But you all, we appreciate you all as usual, man. All our listeners, all of our supporters, whether you're a new listener or you've been listening or you're going back, even if this is 10 years from now, you're going back through all the episodes. Man, shout out to you. We love you all, and we definitely want to see you all grow. We love each other. We want to see each other grow, and these conversations are things that they help each other. Iron sharpens iron, and we can also help others as well. So, with that, again, I'm Justin,
And I'm married.
and this has been the Just My Look podcast. Y'all have a great one. Peace.